What's up, Wargamers? Welcome back to World of Wargaming. I'm Isaiah, and today I invite you to pull up a chair to the table and let's talk a little bit about scatter terrain. Scatter terrain are all the little odds and ends and doodads that we have to fill in our boards and make them more immersive. While it is not necessary for gameplay reasons, because generally speaking, scatter terrain usually doesn't have any effect on cover or anything like that, even though it's not important to those gameplay mechanics, it's very, very important towards making our boards more pleasing and appealing and immersive to our eyes and our brains and our imaginations. And if we're not fueling our imagination with this hobby when we play, what are we doing here? Now, scatter terrain, in my opinion, is a little bit harder to categorize and throw into groups like I've done in the other videos in this series with the mats and with the actual terrain pieces. But I'm going to try my best. Bear with me. So the groups that I'm going to go with for this, and if you think of any other ways that we can group this stuff, let me know in the comments. Drop a line down there. I'll get back to you. I almost always do. So I think vegetation is the first. Like, if you don't have scatter in your terrain, I think vegetation is probably the first because it's usually the cheapest, the easiest to get your hands on, and it does the best at filling out empty spots in your board. Now, with vegetation, it can be anything. It could be trees, bushes, flowers, planters, anything that you can use that brings life to the board in a natural way. This stuff right here being my absolute favorite. This is lichen, some of which is still in its mostly natural color, some of which has been dyed. These size bags are about 12 bucks at Hobby Lobby, so a little bit less once you factor in coupon, discount, whatever. This stuff will bring your board to life. It will take up space. You can opt, if you want, to use it as a cover-giving thing if you make a large piece of bushes. But one of my favorite things about it is that it's great for covering up seams. Like when you have a piece of area terrain or a building, it really helps to blend those things into the table and into the mat and make it feel more like they are actual structures that have been built in this location, in this fantastical place, as opposed to just being a building or a villa or a whatever that's just sat on the table. And that's why this is probably my number one vote for the thing that you should add to your scatter collection. Now, with the lichen, it does, as I mentioned, come in a couple of different colors. I like this one the best. I feel that the dyed ones, the color is just a little bit too vibrant sometimes if you use too much of it. So I don't use a whole lot of that. I kind of mix that in. This one is my bread and butter. With trees, you have a myriad of options. These are the box of like 60-something pieces of trees from Amazon. They're like 16 bucks. They come pre-flocked, a variety of colors. Some of the colors do look more natural than others. And I opt to individually based trees because then I can put them together in a cluster or a little forest and have that act as a wall or something, like a line of sight blocking piece if I'm playing a wilderness scenario. Or I can just scatter them about for decoration. If you're playing a game where you use footprints to declare terrain, I think it's better to have these and just put them on top of that footprint, because then you can just shuffle them around as you need, as you move models through that piece of terrain, as opposed to actually physically gluing the trees to a footprint. Also, I think that this is better for storage because you can just chuck these in a drawer and be good to go. Whereas with gluing the trees to a footprint, you got to be real careful with them. They're awkward. They don't really stack up very well, so it's hard to conserve space while using them. So I think that's the best way. And again, there's lots of options. You can cater this type of vegetation to whatever table you're playing, mostly using model train supplies, which is, I think, what these are intended for. Now, they're not, I like these trees. I think they give a great mix of playability and visual, But the big 28, the actual trees that are more to scale with 28 millimeter do look amazing. But again, storage, cost, opportunity to damage them. They're not as easy to play around, I think, as these, because these aren't that much taller in model, so you're not knocking them quite as much, unless, of course, they're on the edge of the table. Then they get knocked down constantly. Another option for trees are these blank tree frames, armatures. You can go kind of two ways with these. You can just leave them bare, maybe sprinkle a little snow powder on from the top to do winter trees. Or you can do which I may do some of, but also my plan with these is to do other things other than green. So things like cherry trees or fall trees, so that I can maybe swap out some of the scatter thing as the seasons change throughout the year, just to keep it fresh. And then there's also other styles of trees. Now, all of those trees that I've shown you have just been packs that I've found on Amazon. And there's also, if you're playing more deserted boards, little cacti, these were like maybe 15 or 20 in a box for $7 or $8 at Hobby Lobby, and you got a lot of different sizes and styles of cactus. So I think that the best thing I can say as far as that type of scatter is just keep an eye on your local craft stores. Keep an eye on their modeling and kind of their train section, and you can find some very, very, very usable things for our hobby at a very, very, very reasonable cost, which I'm sure that you already knew, but it just, I gotta say it because there's so much good stuff that you can just kind of come across in those stores, and at a fraction of the cost of what you would pay for it at a like hobby store, like our kind of hobby store, where it's just a huge difference. And then the other side of the scatter coin is what I kind of collectively call debris. It's going to be, I know that sounds like it's going to be all trash, and it can be trash, but it can be things anywhere from piles of bricks to pallets to bags of trash, but also things like dumpsters, trash cans, stop signs, street signs, barrels, crates, all the kind of filler pieces that could go in a home, inside of a piece of terrain or a building to flesh that out, or in the streets that's not natural growth. And while there are several avenues for obtaining that type of terrain, for example, WizKids has a lot of boxes of just random kind of scatter terrain, both in modern sci-fi and what's the other one? Fantasy. Duh. They are kind of pricey for what you get. There's a good amount of stuff in there, but they run usually $50 to $70. There are a lot of things, again, that you can find at craft stores or maybe even Walmart or Target if you're bougie. They can also be modified to suit that purpose. But 3D printing is absolutely king of obtaining that type of small scatter, because you can very often find very, very specific things and files and assets or whatever that people are selling on My Mini Factory, or a lot of free stuff on Thingiverse. Now, I know that 3D printing isn't for everyone, but I feel that at this point, almost every group of gamers has at least one person that 3D prints, and that is probably, if you ask them nicely and maybe give them a few dollars to help for time and materials, and obviously find the files yourself, they would probably be willing to help you out and print that stuff out for you. Can't guarantee that, because I don't know every group everywhere in the world, but it seems that in a lot of the groups that I interact with, at least around my town that play different games, there's almost always at least one person that presents. Now, I'm obviously not counting myself in these numbers, because that would be a horrible, horrible skew to my made-up statistic. So to provide a few examples, this little ice machine right here, see how awesome that is? This is the main reason that I paid like $50 for the WizKids kit. It comes pre-painted. It's really, really solid, really, really sturdy. And it looks really good. You know, it's a cool little piece to have sitting outside of your gas station or your Dollar General or whatever building you have in your urban setting. And that kit came with a lot of good stuff. It came with a gas sign that I almost immediately broke. And a lot of these little barrels. I would almost buy another one of those just to get my hands on more of these. It's really quality stuff. Like you're getting a quality product when you buy that, but it is pricey. It is. And our hobby is pricey, and whenever possible, I feel like it's good for any of us to help cut costs where we can. These are some dumpsters. These are actually from the MCP starter box, but it's a dumpster. The scale is bigger for that game for sure than pretty much anything else I play, but whatever, it's a dumpster. Dumpsters can be big. This is a hard plastic kit, which you can find. A lot of times you'll get stuff like this included in starter boxes for games, same as this traffic light, which is also from the MCP core starter box. This is a big chunk of what was supposed to be like orky stuff, but don't paint it like orky stuff. And then this is a pile of junk that you can use in pretty much any setting. And again, this is hard plastic. With 3D printed ATM. Like the hard plastic and stuff is very, very, very nice. It's the convenience or the variety that you can track down for a much more reasonable cost with printing that I think sets it above the other methods of obtaining this type of scatter. You can even do homemade pieces. Little scratch build. This is all trash. This is all like foam and cut up sprue and some extra bits of wire and stuff, and it's glued to a piece of foam board. Not even like good footprint material. But that works well, and I can use that in a lot of different settings. This is another piece from that WizKids gas station set that I just wanted to show because, again, the stuff is really nice. It's really cool, and pre-painted is always a plus in my book. There's also a fair amount of MDF scatter out there. A lot of this that I have has come when I've bought kits from like War Cradle or Black Site Studios, or a lot of those kind of larger kits will also come with several pieces of MDF scatter, and it looks good. Some people might be purists, some people don't like mixing all that stuff. It doesn't bother me one bit. It's just, when I look at it, I'm just like, okay, it's just another texture that's on the board, another piece of variety, because things aren't always uniform in or really ever uniform unless you live in an HOA, and that's the topic for not another video. That's just not a topic to discuss. And now, friends, time for a bonus section category: barricades. These are in my mind, these are really important for making a good board. No matter whether they're, split rail or stone or chain link or iron or concrete and graffiti or picket / whatever wooden fence. They're awesome because they provide you with a couple of things that are very important for a game. And they are kind of an exception to the not affecting the game mechanics, because obviously they're going to be great for cover. So providing more cover and more places to get cover on the board, cutting down on those across the board firing lanes where you have to come down this one approach and there's just no way to not get melted. They also help section off the board visually to create little, yards or areas behind businesses or work yards at the construction site or whatever which is more realistic because those things, a lot of times are going to have those boundaries and borders and divisions between them. And having a variety of them gives you the opportunity to mix that up considerably. Now here we have some homemade ones, some chain link that I made forever ago. A lot of MDF. I really like MDF for this purpose because it's usually quite cheap and easy to put together. There's not a lot of steps. It's usually just fence base, go. And then some 3D printed ones. I love these 3D printed walls. It was like a kit that had straights and corners and T's and curves and four ways and all kinds of stuff. And it allows you to just really, really, really customize out whatever kind of layout you could possibly want to put these in for the board and the game that you're playing. And of course, now some, that can block line of sight. That might not give you cover, might just lay down a little bit. That might just be set dressing. Cover and cost you an inch or whatever to go over as long as it's not an inch or high tall, because that's the rule for a lot of games. But barriers are not key. They're not crucial. You don't have to have them, but they are very, very, very nice, both for aesthetics and for making a fun game that can provide you some good moments of sneaking up on somebody or cutting down the back alley to try to get a flank and opportunities like that, as opposed to just wide open spaces. You know what I mean? Now, when acquiring or beginning to acquire or continuing to acquire your scatter collection, I think that it's always important to consider the kind of hierarchy of genres, or the pyramid of genres, which is a theory that other people may have, but this is how I word it and visualize it in my brain, is that sci-fi is at the top. Any terrain or scatter terrain or mat or whatever can be sci-fi terrain, because the universe is an ever-expanding and infinite place, which means there's an ever-expanding and infinite number of worlds that you could create at varying levels of evolution and industry. So there could be worlds in a sci-fi game that are very agrarian and look very fantasy on the board. There could be boards that are, coming into steam and maybe early gasoline. So an opportunity you could use some of that Wild West stuff and go for a whole Firefly kind of vibe. And then, of course, your modern stuff can just be a world that's somewhere similar to our timeline. The possibilities are infinite in a sci-fi game. Then, next down is going to be, for me, modern terrain. It kind of sits in the middle. There's a little bit of overlap, obviously going up with sci-fi. And depending on the modern terrain, if you're talking modern as in World War II, that kind of era, especially in Europe, a lot of those buildings can 100% go down the pyramid and be used in fantasy, as well as up, because anything can be sci-fi terrain. Some of the up towards the top, I guess, of the modern section, where you have super modern building up to cyberpunk style buildings, those don't translate down as well into fantasy. And then you've got fantasy at the bottom, because especially if it's very fantastical fantasy, yes, it can be used in sci-fi, because anything can, but it's not really going to fit into a modern setting. It can, depending on the game. But if you're playing a game that is strictly a modern game, some of that stuff's not going to work. And that's also depending on how fantasy it is. Does it have the very kind of almost cartoonish World of Warcraft type architecture, which I love, or that kind of Mordheim-y type style, which I love, but it's not going to fit well into a modern game. But again, anything can be sci-fi terrain. So as you're buying, you got to obviously consider what games you play, what systems you play, where can you get the most use out of it. And that's why I think vegetation is a great place to start, because every world needs some type of plant life to help fill in the gaps and to bring it to life. From there, it's just a matter of taking the game that you play and figuring out what types of objects are going to fill out that world the best. Now, again, if you play a lot of sci-fi games, I do recommend maybe looking for a couple of pieces that could fit into a modernish game or your sci-fi game, as opposed to going full on super duper high tech futuristic pieces. Get some of those too. Get whatever you want. I'm just offering my opinions on the topic as always, and I'm just a talking head on the internet who likes heavy metal and toy soldiers. So, grain of salt with pretty much everything I say. But once you've got whatever you need for the main things that you play, then it's fun to start looking at other genres and other game systems and kind of branching out your collection. That's what I did. I started with a lot of fantasy stuff and some sci-fi stuff. I built up heavy on cyberpunk type terrain and kind of post-apoc terrain that could go into provide me a lot of different biomes and terrains and scenarios and situations and boards for lots of different sci-fi games. And then once I had a lot of that sci-fi and modern stuff kind of built up, then I started branching into Eastern, like Japanese, Chinese type terrain for games like Hametsu and just general purpose. And then I've, sometimes you can find use. Like I've used some of that Japanese architecture terrain in modern and cyberpunk games as kind of like the Chinatown section. So always looking for that overlap. And then I started branching out into Wild West stuff. And that actually gave me a lot of ideas and a lot of pieces that can be used in any setting, because that's where like a lot of these kind of split rail fences and picket fences and stuff came from. And those can be used pretty much anywhere. And then next, I don't know what'll be next. Maybe I don't know. I've got to start on a little bit of kind of like Middle Eastern desert type terrain. And I'd like to maybe branch out and get some more of that kind of stuff. But who knows? Who knows? If I see something that I really, really like, I'm prone to just being like, give me that. It's a problem. And that, my friends, I believe is going to conclude my scatterbrained discussion of scatter. Thanks so much for tuning in, hanging out, talking terrain with me for a few minutes. I hope you have an absolutely amazing rest of your day.